My name is Harlem Mitchell, and I am 63 years old. I've lived my whole life in the quiet suburb of Maplebrook, just outside Kansas City. Worked construction for 39 years. Built homes I could never afford. Fixed roofs in winter storms, and poured driveways before the sun came up. But my real work, my real masterpiece, was raising my son, Derek. I raised him after my wife, Susan, passed away from breast cancer when Derek was only 10. She was my high school sweetheart, and when she died, the world went quiet. For a while, I was just breathing, just existing. But I pushed through for Derek. I packed his lunches, sat at every school play, missed work to help him with his science fairs. I bought him his first toolbox, taught him how to check oil, and stayed up all night teaching him fractions for his GED. I wasn't just his father, I was his whole world. Or so I thought. A week after his wedding to Camilla, he invited me to move in. "Dad," he said, "we've got the room, and you're not getting younger. Let us take care of you now." I hesitated, but the way he said it, I thought it was love. I thought he meant it. I sold my house, the one Susan and I built together, and moved into the guest suite above their garage. Gave him every dollar I had from the sale to help with their mortgage. I gave them my time, my heart, my hands. But slowly, I realized I hadn't moved in as family. I had moved in as staff. It started small. "Dad, since you're here, could you take the trash out? Then, can you handle dinner? Camilla's working late again. Then, might be good if you stayed home this weekend. We're having friends over." I cooked. I cleaned. I fixed their leaky faucets, walked their dogs, mowed the lawn, and took their dry cleaning. At first, I told myself I was being useful. But after 6 months, it wasn't help anymore. It was expected. Then came the night, the moment that changed everything. It was a Tuesday. I had just made dinner, pot roast, Camilla's favorite. I called them to the table. They didn't come. I waited 20 minutes, then went to knock on their door. They were sitting in the living room, laughing at a TV show, drinking wine. I cleared my throat. Derek looked up like I was interrupting something sacred. Camilla rolled her eyes. "You know," she said, setting her glass down, "it would be nice if dinner was served on time, hot. Not like we're asking for much." My stomach dropped. Then Derek said it. "Dad," he said, "we've been thinking. It's time to set some boundaries. You either do things properly around here, meals, laundry, yard, errands, or you can go find your own place. This isn't some retirement resort." I stared at him, my own son. I waited for a smile. A "just kidding." A flicker of guilt. Nothing. Just a cold stare. Like I was a burden in their perfect home. I took a deep breath, walked over to the kitchen, turned off the stove, and without looking back, I said, "I won't be your servant, son. I'll take my leave." Then I went upstairs, packed a single duffel bag, and walked out that same night. He didn't stop me. Camilla didn't even look up from her glass. I took the old truck I kept in their garage and drove to Eldon Motel on the edge of town. Cheap rooms, buzzing lights, thin walls. But you know what? It was peaceful. No one barking orders. No chores list taped to the fridge. Just me. My thoughts. My silence. For the first time in months, I slept 8 straight hours. The next day, I bought a prepaid phone. A new number. No calls. No texts. I needed quiet. I needed space. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not after what they did. Day 2, I started walking again, mornings around Maplebrook Park. I stopped at Millie's Diner for black coffee and eggs. The waitress, Trish, remembered me from years ago when I'd fixed a broken sink in the back for free. She smiled and said, "It's good to see you again, Mr. Mitchell." That was the first kind thing someone said to me in months. Day 3, I visited Pine Acres, the senior center where my buddy, Roland, lived. He just had knee surgery. We sat on the porch and talked about the Chiefs, backaches, and grandkids who never visit. He didn't know I'd moved out. I didn't tell him. I wasn't ready to speak it out loud. By day 4, something strange happened. I didn't miss them. Not the big house. Not the noise. Not even the sun I used to tuck in with bedtime stories. Because the man I left behind in that house, that wasn't my son anymore. Then came day 5. I was sitting in the motel room, polishing my old work boots just to feel useful when my phone lit up. 12 missed calls, all from Derek. 3 voicemails, and a string of texts. "Dad, please call me back. Where are you? Camilla needs to talk to you. We didn't mean it like that. There's been an emergency." I froze. An emergency? I stared at the phone. My heart beat louder than a clock on a motel nightstand. Something had happened. But was it real concern? Or did they just realize how much they depended on the old man they treated like a ghost? I picked up the phone, then set it back down. I wasn't ready to call back. Not yet, because for the first time in years, I finally had their silence. And now, they had mine. I didn't call Derek back that day, or the day after. Somewhere deep inside me, the man who had once jumped at every ring of his son's phone had gone quiet. But the silence wasn't bitter. It was healing. That morning, I sat at the diner again. Same table, same waitress, same black coffee. Trish refilled my cup and said, "You've got the look of a man who's finally sleeping again." I smiled just a little. She sat across from me when it slowed down and asked, "You living out of the motel now, Mr. Mitchell?" "Just taking a little break," I replied. "From people who forgot how to say thank you." She nodded, like she knew the feeling too well. "Sometimes," she said, you gotta disappear to be seen." That line stuck with me. After breakfast, I drove out to the edge of town, to a small patch of land I'd bought 20 years ago, back when Susan was still alive. It was supposed to be our retirement spot. We planned to build a little ranch-style cabin there, plant tomatoes, maybe get a dog or two. But after she passed, I left it untouched. Just trees, soil, and memories. Now, though, I saw it differently. Now I saw a beginning. The flashbacks came uninvited. As I walked the land, I remembered Derek at 5 years old, chasing butterflies in our old backyard. I remembered him crying in my arms at Susan's funeral, asking if Mommy would ever come back. I remembered late-night shifts and early morning pancakes. I remembered sacrificing promotions so I could make his baseball games. I remembered cashing out my pension early to help with his college tuition, even though he dropped out after 2 semesters to find himself. And then I remembered that Tuesday night, his cold eyes, that ultimatum, asking me to serve him. You see, what hurts most about betrayal isn't the words. It's the history behind the voice saying them. The years, the love, the things you gave up for them, the parts of yourself you'll never get back. Back at the motel, I pulled out a pen and a cheap spiral notebook. I wrote one line. "Today, I start over. Not because I want to, but because I must." Then I underlined it twice. It was the first entry in what would become a journal, and later, something much bigger. That night, I listened to the voicemail Derek left. Just once. "Dad, it's Camilla. She's in the hospital. Something with her liver." I didn't mean what I said the other night. We were stressed. You know how she gets. "Please, we need you." The voice was shaky, tired, but not because of guilt. It was panic, because the man they dismissed had taken his strength with him. I stared at the phone. I knew the hospital. I could have driven there in 10 minutes. But I didn't. Not out of cruelty, but because for the first time in decades, I was finally tending to me. And I knew what Derek was really saying wasn't, "We miss you." It was, "We need you to fix things." Again, day 7. Roland called. "Hey, old man," he grumbled. "Heard you're squatting in a roach motel like you're 20 again." I laughed. "Not roaches, just bad wallpaper. You coming to the Veterans Cookout this Sunday?" "Maybe," I said. "You got real food this time?" "Only if you bring your ribs." "Then no," I said. "I'm retired." He snorted. "From cooking, from serving people who don't feed me back." The truth was, something inside me was waking up. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't mourning the man I used to be. I was starting to become someone new. Not just a father, not just a widow, not just a man with calloused hands and tired knees, but a man who had worth, even when he wasn't holding up someone else's roof. That week, I started sketching again. Blueprints, rough drawings, old floor plans from memory. I hadn't designed anything in years, but my hands still remembered. And when I pulled up to the empty patch of land again, I could see it clearly. A single-story cabin, big porch, fireplace, one room for me, one for guests, and a study filled with notebooks. Not a house for hiding, a house for living. Derek texted again. "She's home now. Recovery's gonna be long. We're overwhelmed. Just come back. I'll make things right." Still no, "I'm sorry." Still no ownership. Still about them. Not once did he ask, "Are you okay, Dad?" I didn't answer. Instead, I wrote a second line in my journal. Let them miss what they tried to replace. I visited the community center next. Old friend of mine, Pastor Rudy, ran a support group there. I offered to fix their front steps. He insisted on paying. I said, I'm not in it for the cash. Then what are you in it for? I thought about a second, and then I said, dignity. He nodded like he understood that more than most. Before I left, he slipped me a folded paper. So it was something he read during his own tough years. Inside, handwritten in fading ink. When they stop clapping, keep building. When they stop calling, keep walking. When they say you're nothing, remember you were something before they arrived. That night, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, lights off, just staring at that quote. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope, the kind you can't borrow from other people. The kind you build yourself, one brick at a time. The morning I bought lumber again, something shifted in me. It wasn't just about building a cabin. It was about reclaiming who I was before I became Dad the servant. I drove to the old Carter and Son supply yard, the same place I'd taken Derek when he was 9, and begged to build a treehouse. Back then, he held my hand, eyes wide at the smell of fresh-cut pine. Now, as I stood at the counter, alone, my hands didn't tremble. They remembered what to do. I didn't tell anyone where I was building. I didn't post pictures. I didn't update my old friends or show the crew. This project wasn't for them. It was for me. Every swing of the hammer, every plank I laid, each one stripped away years of feeling small, forgotten, and used. And every night, when the sun dipped below the hills and the cicadas started singing, I sat on a folding chair in the dirt and wrote in my journal. Day 1, built my own piece. No blueprint, but my own. Day 3, blisters again, but they feel like purpose. Day 5, no more missed calls, only clear skies. Meanwhile, the text from Derek kept coming. Long ones, angry ones, guilt-tripping ones. You just gonna disappear like this? Camilla says it's cruel. So this is how you treat family? We're drowning here, and you're what? Hiding. And then, finally, don't bother coming back. We'll manage. That one made me laugh. Because by we'll manage, he meant, you're not coming to rescue us? Fine. We'll pretend we never needed you. But they didn't need me. And they were just starting to realize how much. Later that week, something unexpected happened. I was on the lot, laying the floor beams, sweat pouring off my brow, when I heard a voice behind me. Mr. Mitchell. I turned. It was Eli, a quiet young man from church. Used to mow my lawn for a few bucks when he was in high school. Now 22, covered in tattoos, holding a bag of burgers and 2 sodas. My mom said you might be building something out here. I saw the truck. I gave him a nod. I'm building peace. He smiled. Mind if I swing a hammer? Eli wasn't just helpful. He was hungry to learn. Said he dropped out of trade school. Couldn't afford tuition. Been bouncing between part-time jobs and helping his grandma. For the next week, he showed up every morning at 8, tools in hand, questions ready. We didn't talk much at first, but by the 3rd day, he said, you know, I never saw my dad swing a hammer, or anything really. I looked at him and said, then maybe we swing enough for both of them. Word spread. Soon, 2 more young men showed up, Jason, a quiet welder with a crooked smile, and Tarek, a stocky kid who used to get in fights in high school, but had hands steady as stone. By the 2nd week, we weren't just building cabin. We were building a place to teach. A place where young men without fathers could learn how to build something more than walls. One afternoon, Rachel, the daughter of Susan's best friend, dropped by with her 7-year-old son, Caleb. I heard you were out here, she said, smiling. And Caleb wanted to meet the man who built half of Maplebrook. I knelt beside the boy, handed him a pencil, and said, can you draw me a cabin with a window for a dog? He grinned and nodded. He came every Saturday after that. While the foundation grew stronger, Derek's world quietly cracked. Roland finally told me what I suspected. Derek had been laid off. Camilla's recovery had stalled. Her health fragile, her mood worse. The mortgage was months behind. Their friends had stopped visiting. No one wanted to be around entitled people in crisis. Still, I didn't gloat. I didn't cheer, because that's not what real men do. Real men let consequences do the talking. Around week 4, I walked out to the ridge on the edge of the land. The view was breathtaking. Rolling trees, a river in the distance, and quiet that wrapped around your heart like a blanket. I sat down on a tree stump, pulled out my journal, and wrote. Funny how it took losing everything to gain something that finally feels real. I am not their servant. I am not their safety net. I am me. Again, later that night, I stood in the cabin's half-built doorway, the frame casting long shadows on the dirt floor, and I whispered something to Susan. I'm okay now. I'm in it. For the first time in years. I'm in it. The cabin wasn't finished yet. Not even close. But the front porch was finally strong enough to stand on, and that was enough for now. Every evening, after the sun slipped behind the trees and the bugs started humming, we'd gather there. Me, Eli, Jason, Tarek, little Caleb with his crayons, and sometimes Rachel, sitting quietly with a mason jar of tea. It wasn't just wood and nails anymore. It was belonging, and it didn't come with ultimatums. One evening, as we packed up for the night, Caleb asked, Mr. Harlan, why do you build this all by yourself? Before I could answer, Eli said he ain't alone, and he builds cause people forgot what he's worth. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, because for the first time, someone else had said it out loud. The next morning, I came early to lay down insulation under the floorboards. It was still cool, dew clinging to the grass, and Gus, my old black lab, had followed me out and curled up by the fire pit. I had just knelt down to check the framing when I heard it. A car door, then footsteps in the dust. I turned. Derek, jeans too clean for real work. Polo shirt. That same unsure look he wore when he was caught doing something wrong as a boy. He didn't say anything right away. Just looked around at the boards, the tools, the people scattered behind me who were quietly watching. Then he looked at me. Dad, this is what you've been doing. I stood slowly, wiped my hands on a rag, looked him in the eye. I've been rebuilding. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but the words didn't come easy. Finally, he muttered, Camilla's worse. She might need a transplant. I nodded, but said nothing. He shifted. I lost the house. Another pause. I was wrong, Dad. Still, I said nothing. Because it wasn't time for words. It was time for recognition. And that doesn't come from saying I was wrong. It comes from living differently. Derek gestured to the cabin. Can I help? That stopped me. My first instinct was to say no, to protect what I'd built, to guard the peace I'd earned. But before I could answer, Eli stepped forward, hammer resting on his shoulder. You know how to frame a window? Derek blinked. Oh no. Eli smirked. Then start by sweeping. And just like that, Derek picked up a broom. He didn't speak much that day. Didn't complain. Didn't boss. Just swept, measured, fetched tools. I watched him the way I'd watched my crew all those years ago, quietly from the side, waiting to see if he was here to work or to be seen. By sunset, he was covered in sawdust, shirt stuck to his back, and when I handed him a bottle of water, he took it, looked me in the eye, and whispered, thank you. That night, we didn't speak as father and son. We just sat on the porch, me on the left, him on the right, Gus curled up between us like a tired bridge. And under the stars, in silence, something mended. Not fully, not neatly, but like a hairline crack filling slowly with time. Over the next few days, Derek kept showing up. Sometimes early, sometimes late, sometimes quiet, sometimes trying too hard. But he kept showing up. And Eli, he kept him in check. Grab that saw, rookie. Measure twice, man, not guess twice. Yo, if you break that level again, I'm charging you. Jason and Tarek didn't treat him like a boss's kid. They treated him like one of them, a man who had to prove himself. And I'll let it be that way, because respect isn't inherited. It's earned. One afternoon, after framing the second window, Derek sat beside me in the shade. He glanced at the woodpile. You know, Camilla never really liked you. I looked at him, quietly, waiting. He sighed. She said, you made me feel small, because you were everything I couldn't be. I shook my head slowly. I wasn't trying to be better than you, son. I was trying to be there for you. His shoulders sank. I know. I didn't know how to be a man. So I tried to control everything instead of learning from you. That one hit different, because for once it was honest. That night, I wrote in my journal. The dust is starting to settle. My son is learning to sweep, to listen, to care. Not because I demanded it, but because life brought him to his knees. I didn't need revenge. I just needed room to be seen. The cabin reached its final shape by the end of that month. A-frame roof, wide porch, sunlight kissing every corner of the main room. It wasn't perfect. Some joints were crooked, some planks split, but it was real. and every part of it had a name behind it. Eli's hammer, Jason's tape, Tarek's smile, Caleb's drawing pin by the door. And now, even Derek's hands were in it too. Not to reclaim what he'd lost, but to understand what he almost threw away. One day he brought a box. Inside, old photos of Susan, of me, of baby Derek in that treehouse. I found them in storage, he said. I thought maybe you could put them up in here. I took the photo of Susan and stared at it. She looked right through me with those smiling eyes, like she already knew. I think, I said, she'd like what we're building. The first time I saw the mayor's car pull onto the dirt path to my cabin, I thought he was lost. Maplebrook's mayor, Jeffrey Harmon, had been in office for nearly a decade. Slick suits, radio interviews, ribbon cuttings. He wasn't the kind of man who got dirt on his loafers. But there he was, squinting at the rising frame of the cabin while a crew of misfit young men hammered, measured, and laughed like brothers. When he saw me walking up, he grinned. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Harlan Mitchell, you've been busy." I didn't shake his hand at first, not out of rudeness, but because my hands were covered in sawdust and dried paint. He didn't seem to mind. He looked around at the frame, the porch, the fire pit, the chalk drawings from Caleb still scrawled on the nearby boulders. "People are talking," he said. "Word is you've turned this old patch of land into something special." I shrugged. "Just building peace." The mayor smiled. "Son of mine works down at the supply yard. Says you've been buying steady, quiet, paying in cash. No permit headaches, no noise complaints." He turned and looked me straight in the eye. "You're what this town forgot, Harlan. Men who build, men who teach, men who don't need a podium to lead." Then he handed me a white envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "An invitation," he said, "to the town's annual Heritage Builders Dinner. We usually hand out a few plaques to folks with clean shoes and money. But this year, I want to honor someone with calluses." I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a handwritten note. "To Harlan Mitchell, builder, father, mentor, man of quiet strength. Your work speaks louder than words ever could. Please join us." I didn't cry, but something inside me cracked open. All my life, I never needed medals. Just a little respect. Now, it was showing up, not in a ceremony, but in recognition. The following week, the cabin crew buzzed with energy. Jason found a second-hand suit at Goodwill for me. Eli helped me sand down an old chair to donate for the auction table. Tarek, who'd never been to a town event in his life, insisted on cooking ribs for the volunteers. And Derek? He cleaned every window in the cabin. Twice. He didn't ask if he could come. He just showed up with a tie too tight around his neck and shoes a size too small. The builder's dinner was held at the community center. I hadn't stepped foot in that place since Susan's memorial reception. But that night, the lights were soft, the smell of barbecue filled the air, and people I hadn't seen in years walked up to me with quiet nods and warm smiles. "Didn't know you were still around. You're the guy fixing the kids up at that lot, right? My boy said you taught him how to drill a straight line." The whispers followed me around the room like a gentle tide. Not pity, pride. When Mayor Harmon stepped up to the mic, the room hushed. He talked about change, about the things we lose when we forget the past. And then he said, "Tonight, we honor not a developer, not a politician, not a donor, but a man who reminds us that legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we build while we're still here." He called my name. The room stood. I hadn't heard that much applause since Derek graduated high school. I walked to the podium slowly. My knees weren't what they used to be, but my back was straighter than it had been in months. I looked out over the crowd, at strangers, at friends, at Caleb waving with both arms, and at my son, seated in the corner, hands folded, eyes glistening. I didn't prepare a speech, so I spoke from where it hurt and healed. I was told once I had two choices, serve or leave. I chose to leave, not because I was bitter, but because serving without love is slavery. I left quietly. I didn't shout. I didn't break anything. I just started building something for me. And what I found was that when you stop begging to be included, you start making room for people who actually value you. I'm not a hero. I'm not perfect. But I remember every nail I hammered for people who never said thank you. So now, I build for people who say it with their actions. Thank you for remembering me, even if it came late. There were tears. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet ones. The kind that come from people realizing they forgot something good. Afterward, the mayor walked me to the parking lot. You know, he said, I'd love to fund a project like yours. Turn that land into a learning center. Give you some help. I smiled. You're already helping, I said. Just don't get in the way. He laughed. Fair enough. That night, back at the cabin, we gathered around the fire pit. Eli passed out sodas. Jason played music on a little speaker. Caleb drew a picture of the cabin with a flag that said Mr. Harlan's home. Derek sat beside me, quiet again, but not cold. He leaned in, almost like he was ashamed to ask, Do you think Mom will be proud of this place? I nodded. She'd be proud you're here. He looked down at his hands, then said the words I'd waited a lifetime to hear. I don't want to be like the man I became, Dad. I want to be like you. I didn't need to respond, because some moments don't need answers. They just need presence. And that night, for the first time since Susan died, I felt whole again. Not because I had one, but because I had rebuilt. Not just walls, but hearts. Summer faded slowly in Maplebrook. The leaves turned gold at the edges, the evenings cooled, and the cabin smelled like cedar and second chances. Every morning, I walked barefoot on the porch, coffee in one hand, journal in the other. Gus would rest his head on my boot while the fog lifted from the trees. And every morning, I wrote the same line first. Today is worth showing up for. The cabin was no longer just mine. We'd added a workbench under the old oak out back. Eli taught welding basics on Thursdays. Jason ran weekend projects with high schoolers who couldn't sit still in class. Tarek had even started a YouTube channel, Hammers and Healing, where he posted time-lapse of our builds with soft gospel music in the background. It wasn't polished, but it was real. And Derek? He came every Tuesday. No fanfare, no speeches. He just showed up with gloves, water, and a willingness to listen more than he talked. One day, he asked if he could speak to the group. The guys circled up in the clearing, leaning on hammers and knee pads. He cleared his throat. My dad built homes for a living, he said, but I didn't realize he'd spent his life building people. Me, most of all. And I messed that up. Bad. Silence. Then Eli clapped once. We've all messed things up. What matters is if you keep showing up. And Derek did. Around that time, something surprising happened. A letter came in the mail, hand-delivered by Pastor Ruth. It was from the Maplebrook School Board. They'd heard about our little cabin project and wanted a partner. Not just to donate supplies, but to create a mentorship program. A place where struggling boys could come learn life skills, eat hot meals, and hear hard truths from men who didn't sugarcoat failure. They wanted to call it the Mitchell Workshop. I stood there on the porch, reading the letter twice. My hands trembled, not from age, but from knowing that somehow my quiet life had become a legacy. A week later, I got another surprise. Derek showed up with a for sale sign under his arm. I'm selling the condo, he said. Too many ghosts. Where will you go? He looked toward the ridge behind the cabin. I thought maybe I'd build something out here. Simple. Close. Not in a way. I raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? He laughed. I already poured the slab. With my own hands this time. That was all I needed to hear. But perhaps the greatest shock came 3 weeks later. Jason called me from the community center. Hey, Mr. H, you got a minute? I drove down, thinking maybe one of the boys broke a thumb or a pipe. But when I walked in, the entire crew was standing in a half circle. Eli, Jason, Tarek, Caleb, even Trish from the diner. On the table sat a wooden box. Hand-carved. My initials burned into the top. Eli stepped forward. We all chipped in. You've done more for us than we can say. So we figured you shouldn't have to live alone anymore. He opened the box. Inside was a photo album, each page filled with photos of our journey. Frames going up, kids holding tools, me asleep on a stack of lumber with Gus at my feet. At the back, there was a small note, handwritten by Caleb. You're my grandpa now, not because you're old, because you make me feel safe. I couldn't speak. The tears came fast, hot, and without shame. I wasn't just building a place anymore. I'd build a family, not by blood, but by sweat, grace, and forgiveness. That night, Derek and I sat on the porch, feet up, watching the stars. You know, he said softly, I spent most of my life trying not to be like you. I raised an eyebrow. And now, He smiled. Now I hope someday my son says I am. He pulled out a small envelope. Camilla and I were adopting. A little boy, 3 years old. Foster system. Tough story. He looked over at me, eyes wet. We want him to grow up with people like you around. I held that envelope in my hands for a long while. Then I stood, walked inside, and came back with a small item, Susan's old locket. Inside was a photo of Derek at age 5, and one of her laughing under the apple tree. I pressed it into his hand. Give this to him one day, I said. Tell him he's part of something good. Weeks passed. The cabin was complete, but I wasn't done building. We broke ground on the Mitchell workshop with kids from all over town. Mothers I'd never met brought their sons. Old co-workers donated tools. A retired shop teacher volunteered to run night classes. And every Thursday night before we packed up, we'd light a fire out back. No phones, no lectures, just men, boys, and the kind of talk that heals without needing to fix. One night, I stood outside the cabin, watching the smoke curl into the stars. Derek walked up behind me, holding his new son in his arms. The boy reached for me without fear. I lifted him gently, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, "You're home now." Autumn rolled in like an old friend. Golden leaves danced across the porch. The air was sharp in the morning and soft in the evening. The cabin creaked when the wind pushed through the trees, but it didn't groan. It felt settled, kind of like me. The Mitchell workshop was thriving. Every week, more boys showed up. Some angry, some scared, some just hungry. But they came, and they stayed. And when they left, their hands weren't empty. They held something. A birdhouse, a toolbox, a photo, a purpose. Derek oversaw operations now. He'd found his rhythm, not as a boss, but as a student of grace. Every mistake he made, he owned. Every tear a boy cried, he sat with. And every time I saw him hold his adopted son, Jalen, I saw the father he could have been years ago, and now was becoming. One Thursday evening, as I was standing down a bench with Eli and Jason, a car pulled up. Not a local car. It was clean, too clean. Chrome wheels, city plates. A woman in heels stepped out, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. Her name was Leslie Crane, and she was from a development firm out of Chicago. "Mr. Mitchell," she smiled, "you've built something beautiful out here." I stayed silent. "Word gotten out," she continued. "There's buzz, press, influence." She handed me a folder. Inside were mock-ups of a commercialized version of our cabin. Paved roads, cafeteria, signage, a gift shop. They called it Mitchell Legacy Ranch. I stared at the words like they were in another language. Leslie beamed. "We're prepared to invest 7 figures. You be the face, of course, but we'd handle the rest. Scaling this nationally. Paid staff, TV spots, licensing." Eli leaned against the wall, unimpressed. Jason looked like he wanted to spit. But me? I just said 4 words. "What's the catch, ma'am?" She smiled again, that tight corporate kind. "No catch. We just want to take what you've built and bring it to the world." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch with Gus curled at my feet, the fire crackling low. 7 figures. That money could pay off every mortgage in this valley. It could fund 10 workshops. But the thought of putting a trademark symbol on something that was born from pain, it made my stomach turn. I thought of Susan, how she used to say, "Harlan, if you ever get rich, don't let it make you poor." I understood now. Rich in money could mean poor in peace, poor in purpose, poor in what matters. The next day, I gathered everyone on the work site. The boys, the crew. Derek, Jalen sat in his lap, chewing on a wooden spoon. I held the folder in one hand, and in the other, I held a photo album the guys made me. One was shiny. The other? Worn, bent, fingerprinted with memories. "Some folks came by," I said, "offered to make this bigger." A murmur rippled through the group. "They say we can scale it, sell it, franchise it." Tarek frowned. "Like a fast food workshop?" Laughter. I nodded, but I told them this place wasn't built on profit. It was built on presence. Eli stood. "If you need more hands, we'll help." Jason added, "If you need donations, we'll raise them." Derek spoke last, his voice steady. "If you say no to them, Dad, you won't be standing alone." That evening, I called Leslie, told her kindly but firmly, "We're not for sale." She tried to counter, but I stopped her. This wasn't built to scale. It was built to stay. Click. The weeks that followed were the best yet. The workshop kept growing, but on our terms. The local lumberyard started donating materials monthly. A retired chef started teaching the boys how to cook for themselves. Rachel launched a Saturday reading circle on the porch for kids with nowhere else to go. And every week, Jalen learned a new word. One week it was Papa. Another? Bill. One night, as I tucked him into his nap cot inside the cabin, he whispered it again. Bill, Papa. My heart almost cracked wide open. Then, one Sunday, something I never expected happened. I was invited to speak at Susan's old church, the same place where I said goodbye to her years ago. I hadn't been back since. I almost said no, but Rachel took my hand that morning, looked me in the eye, and said, "You always taught us to show up when it matters." The pews were packed. Men I'd mentored, women I'd once fixed porches for, young men in flannel and boots. Even the mayor. I stood at the pulpit, staring at that cross above the altar. My knees trembled, but my voice, it held. They say forgiveness is the final step. I began. But I think forgiveness is what builds the bridge after you've learned to stand on your own. I've made mistakes, and I've been hurt. But every nail I've driven since the day I left my son's house has been a step back to myself. And now, I'm not just a builder of things. I'm a builder of men, of hope, of home. After the service, an old woman with silver braids pulled me aside. She pressed something into my hand, a small wooden cross. "I carved this after my son died," she said softly. "But I think it belongs here now, on the cabin wall." I closed my fingers around it, not out of habit, but honor. That night, I nailed that little cross above the main doorway. It wasn't for show. It was for every lost boy who walked through that door, and every broken father who learned to love again. The cough had been there for weeks. Just a tickle at first, then a rasp, then blood. I didn't tell anyone at first, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to steal any more time from the people who were just learning how to build it. But you can't hide from the truth, not forever. Especially not from someone like Derek, who had finally learned to look into his father's eyes instead of past them. "Dad," he said one morning, "you look pale." I brushed it off. Just a cold. These fall mornings hit harder than they used to. But he didn't believe it. He called Rachel, who called her cousin at the clinic. One chest x-ray and a biopsy later, I had a folder full of words like stage for non-operable and comfort-focused. I stared at that folder in silence, then tucked it into the back pocket of my overalls and drove straight to the cabin. I didn't cry. I just walked the rooms, ran my hand along the smooth beams we'd sanded together, sat in the rocking chair Kayla made, looked at the wall where Jalen had scribbled in crayon, "Papa's place." And I smiled, because if this was the end, it was a beautiful one. That evening, I called a crew together. Eli, Jason, Tarek, Derek, Rachel, the boys, even little Jalen, bouncing on his dad's knee. I stood in front of the fire pit where we'd laughed, cried, and broken bread. "Family," I began, "it's time I told you something." I didn't use soft words, didn't dress it up. I told them the truth. Told them how the body I'd spent decades using to build, fix, carry, and provide was finally wearing out. There were tears, real ones, not loud, but painful. Eli dropped his hammer and walked away, hands on his head. Jason cursed softly and kicked a stone. Derek just sat down, silent, holding Jalen a little tighter. "Don't pity me," I said. "I've had more love in these last 2 years than most men get in a lifetime." I looked around at them, this circle of redemption. You all gave me something back, my dignity, my voice, my purpose. And now I get to leave this earth not as a forgotten old man, but as someone who finally lived. The next few weeks were full of peaceful urgency. Derek took over the weekly builds. Rachel started documenting the whole workshop story. Jason and Tarek began teaching. And every night I sat on that porch, sometimes with Gus, sometimes with Jalen asleep in my lap, sometimes alone with the stars and that little wooden cross over the door. I wrote one last entry in my journal. I'm not afraid. I have built. I have forgiven. I have loved. I am ready. The night before I was scheduled to enter hospice care, the whole crew gathered around the cabin. They said they had one last surprise. Eli handed me a blindfold. I laughed. Don't you drop me into a hole now. Just trust us, old man. They walked me about 30 paces north. Took the blindfold off. I stood there speechless. Before me was a second cabin, almost identical to the first, built in just under 3 weeks. The sign above the porch said, Harlan House, a place for the fatherless. Inside were bunks, a library, a small kitchenette, a wall painted in chalkboard for the boys to write prayers, goals, and names of men they wanted to become. Jason looked at me and said, We couldn't let you go without building something for you. I turned to Eli, eyes blurry. How did you? We paid attention. Every lesson, every detail. You taught us how to build homes, Mr. Harlan, and how to be men. I didn't walk into that cabin. I floated, every step filled with pride. Pain, yes, but also release. I ran my hand along the door frame, just like I had with the first one. Inside, there was a small desk and on it a plaque. To the man who taught us not how to avoid falling, but how to rise, forgive, and keep building anyway. That night, we had a bonfire like no other. Music played softly. Jalen fell asleep on my chest. Derek wrapped his arm around me. Rachel whispered, Thank you for saving more than just yourself. I looked up at the sky, clear, wide, and filled with stars, and I whispered, Thank you, Susan. 3 days later, I left this world, but not in a hospital bed, not in a nursing home, not alone. I passed away in the rocking chair on the porch of the cabin I built with my own hands, surrounded by the people who'd become my true family. At my memorial, it didn't talk about death. They talked about nails, about wood, about forgiveness, about how a broken man became the cornerstone of something unshakable. And over the door of the workshop, they carved new words. Mitchell men don't just build walls. They build bridges. And somewhere out there, in the quiet morning haze, a little boy named Jalen stands beside that fire pit, hammer in one hand, eyes lifted to the sky. And when he swings that first nail into the wood, someone will ask, Who taught you how to build like that? And he'll smile and say, My papa did.